Welcome to Let the Boys Kiss, the creation of queer ships, where we ask the question, is it queer baiting, queer coding, or queer canon?
This week, we'll be discussing Fraser and Ray from Due South. I'm Maddie.
And I'm Kelsey. So before we start talking about Fraser and Ray from Due South, we have news, an announcement.
An announcement to make. We've started a Discord, whatever that is.
It's new to us. We're trying our best.
New to Discord, but we were speaking with some folks on Tumblr about how we could all connect, and Discord was raised as an idea. So we've started one. We don't know what we're doing, but we would love to chat with you all. So please come join us. We have a link on our Tumblr, and if you don't have a Tumblr and would still like to come chat with us on Discord, you can email us at ltbkpod@gmail.com, and we'll send you a link. Please join.
That important update aside, always good to be back on Let the Boys Kiss. What are we covering this episode?
We're covering Due South, a 90s show that a lot of people I think will not have heard of, but is a pretty big fandom show. It's about a Canadian Mountie named Benton Fraser and a Chicago detective named Ray Vecchio sometimes, and their partnership.
Yes. Constable Fraser comes from Canada to the mean streets of Chicago and teams up with a streetwise Chicago cop. And I think a little misleadingly in the intro we said we were talking about Fraser and Ray, and we are, but there's two Rays.
Yeah.
There's two different Rays. They recast, and they did not do quite the super vintage television show thing of recasting a character and not mentioning
Which is bold.
Yes. There's a plot reason why there are two Rays within the show.
Mm-hmm.
So our first Ray is Ray Vecchio.
Yep. And then our second Ray is named Ray Kowalski, but he is actually undercover as Ray Vecchio.
Yes. And Ray is his middle name.
Mm-hmm.
His first name is Stanley.
Stanley
His
Raymond Kowalski.
Kowalski. So, what are we looking at? What did we watch for this?
There are 4 seasons of Due South, and we watched every one of them. All 4 seasons.
But not the same way.
No, we did it kind of experimentally. So when this show was suggested to us, it was suggested by someone who recommended Due South, but particularly Fraser and Ray K, as we will be calling him. So the second Ray. And I was like, okay, fun. And even before we had gotten it onto our schedule, I started watching it. But I started watching season 3. Well, I think I watched the pilot. There's like a movie-length pilot. And then I started with season 3 because I was like, I don't need to know about this first Ray character. I'll just get right into the Ray K. So I watched seasons 3 and 4. And was going to be how I left it. But then
we did some research and we learned more about, spoiler, the Ray Wars.
The Ray Wars.
Which we will get into. And so we decided maybe we shouldn't leave it at Ray K. Maybe we really need to get a full grasp of what is happening in Due South. So I watched the show straight through. Mm-hmm. Started in season 1 through the end of season 4. You started with Ray K, came back to season 1 and saw Ray V. And we were curious to see if it changed our perspective. If I would become like a real, Ray V fanatic and be like, Ray K can't match up.
Yeah.
I know this show with Benton and Ray V. Get out of here, Ray K. And you would come in being like, no, Ray K is where it's at. This Ray V is no good.
We were really hoping to have our own Ray Wars, honestly.
Yes. And we'll find out if that happens.
We shall. But either way, we have both seen all of the episodes, even though in different orders. So, as we've already said, the premise of the show, Benton Fraser, RCMP, first came to Chicago on the trail of his father's killers. And for reasons that don't need to be explored at this juncture, he remained attached as liaison to the Canadian consulate. That is the premise of our show.
And then I think we're going to walk through the beats of the Ray V Benton relationship and then the Ray case. We're going to go in chronological order, but just real quickly, we wanted to talk about how Ray V becomes Ray K, so there's no confusion. And it's relatively straightforward. We come back halfway through the show, and Ray V has gone on an undercover mission and has been replaced by Ray K so that no one knows original Ray V is deep undercover.
Yes, because if that detective just disappeared, the mob would know. So yeah, Ray K is just sort of a placeholder, even though everyone clearly knows he is not Ray V. They don't look anything alike. He's just there to continue doing a job as Ray V.
Yes. So we should walk through the show.
So what's
starting with Ray V?
Fraser and Ray V, what's their sort of deal, their vibe as a team?
So they're friendly, you know, they're good friends. The interesting thing about the show, right, is that Ben is not a cop in America. So the show kind of plays out where they just hang out and run into crimes sometimes. And occasionally Fraser will have a crime that he brings Ray in on.
Yeah.
That's sort of how their adventures play out.
They're kind of partners, but seemingly nothing really official, particularly for the first half of the show.
And, you know, there's some interesting things to their relationship. I think in particular the way that Fraser is around women speaks to a potential queerness.
Sure. So yeah, Fraser is an interesting one. We learn we'll get into his sort of romantic history and why he might be this way, but throughout the show, he wears a Mountie uniform, which is important for people to know.
Handsome.
And he's very handsome.
Tall. I described him to you when I started watching the show as he's like prototypically 90s television lead handsome.
Yeah, if you were to imagine what that would look like, it's Paul Gross. And so obviously women are very interested in him everywhere he goes all the time. And he is mostly not interested back. He is getting like aggressively hit on by people all the time and having none of it. So things like this happen a lot, but the most extreme example is at one point Fraser gets invited to Ray's church choir for some reason, and people have found out about this. So Fraser comes and all of these various women are there to hit on him, and Ray's sister Franny is the most in love with Fraser throughout, and so she's pretty aggressively hitting on him, and in the middle of church asks if he wants to have sex, and then luckily a crime happens in the church, and Fraser goes, "Oh darn, excuse me," and literally jumps off the balcony to escape the women.
Yeah. It's like, I gotta get out of here. Bye. And so, yes, that is an example of that kind of thing happening. The other probably like most interesting shippiest moment of, I would say, the Fraser Vecchio relationship is a little bit, it's not that far later. So Franny again really going after Fraser. She shows up at his apartment in lingerie, just comes in the middle of the night. And there's this question a couple episodes later of whether or not Fraser slept with Franny.
Yeah, and he won't say because he's a gentleman, so he doesn't kiss and or not kiss and tell, you know.
Doesn't tell either way,
exactly.
whether he kissed or didn't kiss. But Vecchio is very concerned. And of course, you can play it as he's like, I don't want anyone sleeping with my sister.
Which wouldn't be a surprise because he is kind of a paternalistic sort of guy.
Yes. Although in that episode, he does say to Fraser, if I want anyone to sleep with my sister, and I'm not encouraging this, I'd want it to be with you.
And Fraser says, that's very generous of you, right?
Yes. But then later in the episode, he's having a conversation with Franny, and Fraser's overhearing it. And Ray's explained to Franny that, like, hey, guys like Fraser don't end up with girls like you. And she tells him, you know what your problem is, Ray?
Why don't you tell me?
Yeah, I'll tell you. Your problem is that you are so afraid to dream. You're so afraid to reach out for something that you really want. You know what happens to people like you? They get old. They get alone and they die, and they never know.
Did you sleep with him?
Why? Why would it matter to you if I did?
Yeah, it would. You're my sister. I care about you.
Right. So, does the scene play out with him just being like, hey, I don't want anyone sleeping with my sister? Sure. But the speech that Franny gives Vecchio is kind of strange because it's not like he has a long-term love interest or someone else he's been pining over that, could fit into this idea of like, you're afraid to dream. You're afraid to go for what you want. The only person consistently in his life is Fraser.
So yeah, you're sort of like, what are you saying, Franny? I don't know.
Yeah. And of course you could read his jealousy as like, I want to sleep with Fraser, not you.
Yeah.
Me.
But it just, to me, it feels sort of out of place. It's hard for me to tell what I'm supposed to make of that because I don't feel like they're always leaning into the Fraser Ravy dynamic. But then in this case, you're like, what is this speech Franny gives him? What is he supposed to be going after? What are his dreams?
Unclear. You know, obviously we're watching the show through this specific lens. Mm-hmm. And so I think when you're watching the show through this lens, especially with as strong a background in Starsky and Hutch as we have, and this will come up again, you just see moments where you're like, oh, there could have been hurt comfort right there. If this was a Starsky and Hutch episode, God, they would be holding each other, cuddling each other, heads cradled.
So it
would be incredible.
There's missed opportunities for hurt comfort, but I think overall there are lots of missed opportunities for sort of things that could be shippier than they are.
Yes.
There's an episode where they get locked into a meat locker freezer and they're like, oh no, we're going to get hypothermia and die. And so you're like, oh, they're about to be sharing some body warmth here. Cuddling is coming at any moment. And instead of cuddling, what they do is wrap themselves in meat carcasses to stay warm. What an interesting move. There's also an episode where Ray has fallen into, I think he's in the trunk of a car or something that goes into the water. Either way, Fraser has to save him from nearly drowning. And he doesn't even get to attempt CPR. He's just like, fine. And you're like, okay, well, wasted opportunity.
There's an episode where someone from Fraser's past comes back, an old friend who's now a professional hockey player, and he really like rebonds with this guy. Mm-hmm. And Vecchio doesn't care at all. Yeah. He's not the least bit jealous.
Yeah, they have this, what clearly was like an intimate friendship from their childhood. And there's a real closeness between them. And Vecchio's just like, okay, cool, let's all play hockey together. And you're like, come on, you're not even a little jealous?
And then there's an episode where Fraser gets worked over by some mob guys. When Vecchio first comes to rescue him, no cuddling.
Yeah,
no,
where's the cuddling?
Grabbing him and cradling his head in his lap, you know.
We are truly so spoiled by Starsky and Hutch.
I know. But then when they get back to the station, someone is tending to Fraser's wounds very gently. And you're like, Vecchio?
Nope.
No. It's Elaine.
Elaine. Oh, man. Oh, I'll also say, I don't think we didn't write this down, but there's an episode where they discover a baby that gets left for them. And so it sets up for this episode of them to be taking care of this baby because they don't want to give it to social services. And it just feels like they could have had more fun with the guys raising the baby together, but that doesn't become a part of it.
But on the plus side, a very young Mark Ruffalo is in that episode.
Baby Ruffalo. So. Okay, so we should get into the sort of romantic pasts of each of the guys because they are both kind of odd.
Weird.
Yeah.
So we learn that Fraser has this great love, this great lost love. Mm-hmm. And that is maybe part of the explanation of why he is not interested in any other women. So there's an episode where Fraser tells Vecchio the story of him and this woman, Victoria, who she was a convict or...
she was on the run. She was like someone who drove the getaway car for a robbery or something, and Fraser was tracking her. Right. The two of them get trapped in a Canadian snow situation and both nearly die and have to keep each other alive through this and have this like very...
They have to share body heat.
Yes, they share body heat, and this is why they didn't have Fraser and Vecchio do it, because it's a very emotional experience, and it bonded him to this woman that he was tracking so intensely that he, after like 2 days of sharing body heat and sucking on each other's fingers and singing songs or whatever the hell they were doing, they are deeply in love. And she, at the end of it, asks Fraser to not turn her in. But Fraser's a Mountie. He just can't do it. He does turn her in. And he has regretted it ever since. He feels bad because he loved her and turned her in. And then it comes back to haunt him. Yes.
So the first time Fraser tells Vecchio the story, Ray falls asleep.
Classic.
Hear it. But then, towards the end of the season, she shows back up. She's out of prison. And, it's back on. He's like, yes, now we can be together.
Yep. And she's like remarkably forgiving.
I miss you too.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, they're in love.
Yeah, exactly.
Know? But is she really forgiving? Are they really in love? Well, that's questionable. But she's evil.
Yeah. She has actually come here to ruin his life. And like very effectively. She frames him for crimes in a way that will be impossible for him to come back from. And she shoots his dog.
Yeah, he has a wolf dog hybrid named Diefenbaker, who's great.
Yep.
Yeah, she shoots him.
Mm-hmm. She shoots him.
And then Fraser still is going to run off with her.
He's truly
and it's unacceptable.
Under the spell of Victoria. It is kind of interesting because she tries to ruin his life, but in a way where he'll have to abandon the life he has and come with her. Yeah. So there is like this element
she does want him to come with her.
Yeah. She's like, does feel some sort of connection to him and he to her. And it's all like twisted and weird and interesting. So anyway, at the end, she's trying to get him to come with her. She's stolen diamonds or some shit. And she's like, come with me and abandon your life and come get on this train. She's on a train and the train is leaving the station and Fraser's running after her. And then Ray sees all of this happening and is like, I cannot let Fraser run away with this woman. So he shoots Fraser in the back.
Yeah. Just so he won't be with a woman.
I mean, he claims that Victoria had a weapon, which she did earlier. And so he was like trying to shoot at Victoria and Fraser happened to jump in front of the bullet. But
sure.
Either way, it serves the purpose of getting Fraser to stay, doesn't it?
Yes. And then that's not quite the season finale. And the season finale, Fraser shoots Vecchio.
No. Vecchio jumps in front of a bullet to save Fraser.
Sorry, I was like, what? Is it true vengeance? It's not the Ray K thing where he punches him back.
It's somebody's pointing a gun at Fraser and Ray B jumps in front of it and takes a bullet and then they get to be even Stevens.
Yes, they both got shot. So yeah, I mean it's an interesting explanation for why Fraser is so reluctant around other women. Obviously, this was a very intense bonding experience. I gotta tell you, I didn't like this storyline.
Well, the dog bit was a bit too much.
I couldn't get over it. I was like, to run away with someone who shot your pet?
Diefenbaker? Your best friend, Diefenbaker?
Who saved your life? Earlier?
There's a story that he tells later on about how he met Diefenbaker, and he saved his life.
Yeah, and Diefenbaker was still in the hospital, and he was just going to peace out, leaving this wolf alone in Chicago.
Yeah.
Benton.
I feel like Dave doesn't get the respect he deserves in the early seasons. Going back, having watched seasons 3 and 4, and then going back and watching seasons 1 and 2, there was more than one episode where I was like, Fraser would never treat Diefenbaker this way.
We can talk about it. You know, there's more differences between the first 2 seasons and the second set of seasons than just the Ray K, Ray V thing, like tonally and in terms of the characters. But there is a new actor also playing Diefenbaker. Mm-hmm. It's a different
Draco
wolf. Yes. And I am, as much, I don't think we've said, as much as I'm not deep in the Ray Wars, I am partial to first Diefenbaker.
You're partial to first Diefenbaker? Interesting. Okay.
Yes. But no, I was like, because I like Benton a lot. He's my type of character. Yeah. He's a total Boy Scout. But in my mind, that man would never betray his dogs.
And yet, multiple times in seasons 1 and 2. Anyway, enough Diefenbaker conversation.
Sorry.
That's Fraser's
isn't a podcast about dogs.
No, that's Fraser's romantic past. This interesting, weird, twisted criminal lady thing. And then what's going on with Vecchio's romantic past?
So in the first season, Vecchio's like, a guy about town. He's trying to date. He's like, I'm a snappy dresser. I'm trying to get with the ladies. And you're like, okay, this is fine. Okay. And then some weird stuff starts happening in season 2, which is pretty confusing given season 1.
Yep.
We have an episode where we've met this mob boss who's from like Vecchio's neighborhood earlier. And then he comes back in this season 2 episode and we find out that he has a sister.
Carrie Ann Moss.
I was telling you when I initially watched it, I was like, did we meet that sister in a previous episode? She looks so familiar. And then I realized, no, I just know that actress. It's just Carrie Ann Moss.
Yep.
We've never met her before.
Nope.
And he is intensely in love with her. She's apparently like the love of his life.
And has been since high school or something. The two of them were together as kids.
And you're like, well, you've never mentioned this before, Ray. But okay.
Like deeply in love, very committed to each other, and he like wants to get
willing to like
her.
Burn his life down.
Yes.
To have her.
Like, where did she come from? I didn't know about her.
And then even weirder, so we meet the love of his life. Yep. This woman he's just intensely in love with, would do anything for.
And it ends tragically.
It does. And then in the next episode, I believe it is the next episode,
I think you're right.
we very casually learn that a woman that they're seeing is his ex-wife.
We never knew he had an ex-wife. Where did she come from?
We met the love of his life that he's been in love with since childhood and his ex-wife out of the blue 2 episodes in a row midway through season 2. And it's wild.
Right, Vecchio, you've been keeping secrets, and I don't like it.
You think, like, even if someone weren't your best friend, you at some point would have been like, I was married before.
Maybe.
I've been married and divorced.
Didn't come up.
Wild.
Just didn't come up.
It just didn't come up.
Bizarre.
Wild. Sorry. So, you know, as much as we're like, hey, there are these missed opportunities. Hey, there's like weird romantic stuff going on with both of them with women. There is some fun stuff between Vecchio and Fraser. We would be remiss if we said there wasn't.
A lot of it comes in one episode. I think that's mostly what we're going to talk about. The drag episode. We love a drag episode.
Yes, there is an episode where Fraser goes undercover at an all-girls Catholic school as a teacher. So he is in drag. Mm-hmm. It is not the most convincing drag. No. They've really just put basic ladies makeup on him. Yep. It's not drag makeup, but he looks cute.
He does.
I think he looks cute.
And he's like having a pretty good time. So that's, you know, making it good.
He's bonding with the young ladies. It's very sweet.
Mm-hmm.
But the weird thing is he shows up at the police station and Ray does not recognize him. And he looks like him. Also, he's a giant man.
He's a giant man who looks exactly like himself, but with some lipstick and a wig on. And not only does Ray not recognize him, no one recognizes him. The entire police station is like, who is this elegant woman?
All right. It's a, you know, like a Clark Kent situation, I guess.
So they have some cute little moments. Fraser's like making the most of being in drag and being a woman and having a fun time. There's a part where he's insisting that Ray open his car door for him because it's only polite. And Ray all along has been sort of bickering at him about this. And he's like, you know, Fraser, there's a limit. And Fraser says, to good etiquette? I think not.
Classic Fraser line. And then part of this episode, there's a school dance that happens. And so Fraser is chaperoning the school dance. He gets asked to dance by some other teacher. And then Ray intervenes partially to save him and also so that they can have a conversation. Mm-hmm. And them dancing together is also very cute.
They dance together for quite a while and have a whole conversation. And they're just like doing hilarious dances. And that part is the most fun Fraser-Ray V bit of the episode. But like also maybe of their whole run. I really like the two of them dancing together.
It's very cute.
And then at the end of that episode, they have a little conversation about how Fraser's drag affected Ray. So Ray says to him, you know, Benny, you weren't a bad-looking woman.
Thank you, Ray.
Of course, you weren't exactly my type either.
Well, what exactly is your type?
Oh, I like a woman who's kind and honest with a good sense of humor.
What, I don't have those qualities?
No, you do. I just like a woman who's, you know, a woman.
Oh, that's picky, Ray.
And then they sort of banter a bit. And Ray says, so what are you doing after work?
Nothing with you.
Oh, you're so sensitive.
I love the line. I just like a woman who is, you know, a woman. And to respond to that with like,
that's picky, Ray.
Yeah, be a little bit more open-minded. It's interesting, right? Because on the one hand, Fraser is this very upstanding Boy Scout character, but he's also much more open-minded than Ray, which is not always the way a Boy Scout character is portrayed.
No, but I think that
you might expect some level of conservatism to come with that, but it not in the case of Benton Fraser.
I think that that's sort of coming from the like Canadian piece of his character, right? There's a lot more. The Americans are very rigid in how they look at people, and the Canadian guys they're sort of more open-minded about lots of things. He's open-minded about like racial stuff and class stuff because of his upbringing, and then also all kinds of gender stuff. And various times when especially when sex stuff is involved, that's when it really comes out. Like when they go to a strip club or like a leather club or something, Fraser's always like down with whatever. He just sees the people as people, and Ray V is always like, these people are freaks, you know?
Okay. So that brings us to the beginning of season 3.
Mm-hmm. So everything's a changing. How are we going to get from early Ray to new Ray?
Well, season 3 opens with Benny on vacation back in Canada. And I don't think we said he's from the Northwest Territory. So he's from like rural wilderness.
Like very far north.
Canada.
Not cities.
Yeah.
Open fields, basically.
Right.
And not a lot of people.
Yeah. So he's back up there. He's solving a crime. And while he's in Canada, he gets a call from Ravy. And Ravy's not very explicit about what's happening.
He's being kind of weird. And
he ends the call by telling Benny, you understand that I will be in touch.
As a friend?
Yeah, Benny, as a friend.
The premise of the conversation is like, I'm not going to be there to pick you up at the airport. And then they talk around the like, why? And what do you mean? And why are you calling? And it's just sort of like, don't know what's going on. But yeah, that's how they leave it. And then Fraser comes back from Canada.
Yeah.
Shows up at work. He's looking for Ray everywhere he goes at the station. He's like, anybody seen Ray? And they're all like, Ray Vecchio? And he's like, yes, where is he? And finally, he gets to Ray's desk and someone is standing there, but it's not Ray V.
It's a person who says they're Ray Vecchio, but our season 1 Ray Vecchio, brunette.
Yeah, balding, Italian.
Our season 3 Ray Vecchio, blonde, full head of hair, Polish. But he's like, no, I'm Ray Vecchio. And everyone's like, this is Ray Vecchio. Ray Vecchio's sister, Franny, now works at the station as the civilian liaison. And she's like, it's my brother. You know, my brother, Ray Vecchio.
Yeah, this is him. This is Ray Vecchio. Everybody's like, this is Ray. Hi, Ray. This is Ray. And Ray shows him. He's like, no, excuse me. Sorry. I'm looking for Ray Vecchio, Detective First Class or whatever. And he pulls out his badge with his face on it. It's like, that's me, Ray Vecchio. Weird experience for Fraser.
And obviously in this initial episode, they get to know each other a little bit. And Ray K eventually breaks down and is like, okay, yes, I'm not Ray V. Although Fraser doesn't really hear the whole story.
Because he's climbing around on the roof of a moving car.
Yeah, whatever. And so, yes, we learn throughout the episode, but also then he's able to talk with the chief that Ray V's deep undercover. And they need this guy to pretend to be Ray V. Yeah. So the real Ray V doesn't get killed.
Exactly. But so they're getting to know each other through the episode. By the end, they're going to have to drive this car that's on fire into Lake Michigan. And they have a moment of Ray saying to him, like, working together, it's been weird, but it's been a pleasure. And Fraser agrees. And so they have this moment of like, I kind of like you, even though we just met and things have been really weird. And luckily they survive after Ray jumps in front of a bullet for Fraser, but he's wearing a vest.
Very Ray V.
Kind of. Even though, Kowalski earlier in this episode is like, I don't risk my neck for anybody. And then, of course, immediately risks his neck for somebody. And then at the end, Fraser asks Ray to get dinner after Lieutenant Welsh has told him to give him a shot because he's a good cop. And Fraser's dad tells him he thinks he's a good man. And Fraser says, I think you're right. And
I think we've introduced the device of Fraser's dad. We have not.
Fraser's dad is dead, but he sees him as a ghost.
Yes. So that's just important. Fraser's ghost dad is around from time to time. They have full conversations. So
yeah, it's magical.
We mentioned
realism.
At the beginning that his dad was murdered. So yes. just to be clear.
His dead dad gives Kowalski the seal of approval. And then in our last little bit of Ray V moment before the end of the show, he had promised to get in touch, and so Fraser gets a postcard and he understands that it's a coded message from Ray Vecchio, so he puts the flame under it and it reveals a picture of the two of them together.
It's very sweet, but also a very janky special effect.
It's the 90s. They're doing their best. But it is, I do think that's sort of interestingly romantic. He could have just left him a note that was like, I'm fine, I'll see you later or whatever, but instead he sends him a picture of the two of them together. That's nice.
Thinking of you, buddy. Okay. So, what's these guys' overall deal? How would you contrast the Ray K. Fraser relationship to the Ray V. Fraser relationship?
Ray K feels sort of more vulnerable to me. He's more openly emotional than Ray V. He talks a lot about his feelings and his internal life, and he bonds with Fraser about stuff. In contrast to Ray V, Ray K immediately tells him all about his life story and his childhood trauma and why he's a cop and how he and his ex-wife got together and how they broke up. In episode 2, we learn like everything there is to know about Kowalski. And so they just sort of have a different vibe. I think Ray K feels a little more open, and so then the two of them become, not that, you know, Ray V and Fraser aren't good friends, but it just is a different sort of feeling to Ray K.
I just think it's different to learn that your friend has an ex-wife immediately as opposed to a season and a half into knowing.
Yeah, I feel like how well can you really know this person when in episode 1, Fraser calls Ray V his best friend, and then 30 episodes later, he finds out he had an ex-wife.
Right.
Just feels a little odd.
But yes, to your point about Ray K being more emotional, there's like a strong example of something that doesn't feel anything like Ray V. In season 4. There's a woman who's about to be executed that Ray K is the reason she's on death row. It was a very early case of his. And he's super emotional throughout the entire episode. And eventually they're able to exonerate her. There's like, you know, a big conspiracy that they figure out.
Yep.
And the episode ends with him going back to her home with her and like discussing what happened and what led them to this point. And then he leaves that interaction. He comes into the car with Fraser and he just breaks down and sobs.
Yeah.
And it's a great moment.
It is, and Fraser's just
Ray V would never.
puts a hand on his back and helps him through. But yeah, the whole episode is very like Ray V would never. Because from the beginning of the episode, Kowalski is having this crisis about this woman dying and thinking of himself as a murderer and someone who kills people because this woman's going to die. And at that point, he doesn't even think she's innocent. It's like midway through the episode, after he's gone to see her, that he's like, wait a second, I think she might not be guilty. We should figure out how to get her out of here. And he just is like very affected by having been responsible for the death of a person.
So yes, that's sort of like an overview of how Ray K differs from Ray V. There also is what feels like more queer-coded moments, especially early on as we're getting to know Ray K. Just little things he says where you go, okay.
Interesting. Very early on.
Yes. So, episode 2 of Meeting Ray K.
Yep. So this is the Ray K background episode when we learn all about him. And there's a point when he asks Fraser, and at this point they're in a room with several other people that they have taken into custody.
They're in like
they're in a mausoleum for reasons that you don't need to know.
2 men and a woman that they've taken into custody.
2 criminals and then an older woman, and all of them have been taken into custody. And so in this context, Ray says to Fraser, do you find me attractive?
In what sense?
In the sense of, you know, being a woman.
Do I think you're an attractive woman?
No, I'm not the woman. You're the woman.
I'm the woman.
And then the real woman is like, no, I'm a woman. And Ray says, butt out.
Well, she is.
Well, I know she's a woman. I'm asking Fraser to pretend that he's a woman, okay? And she says, oh, well, can you do that, dear?
Well, I have done that, he says.
And one of the criminals says, so have I. It's rather fun. And Ray says, look, you 3, zip. And you pretend you're a woman, okay? Do you find me attractive?
Very much so, yes.
You're not just saying that?
Well, I'm not really qualified to judge Ray.
And he laughs, and the woman says, well, I don't know what's funny about that. He isn't. And Ray says, it just sounds like something my wife would say.
I didn't know you were married.
I was. Not anymore. And then we get more Ray backstory. But it's pretty immediate, and they've just met each other a few days ago, seemingly. And he's like, you know who will tell me, honestly, if I'm attractive? My new partner.
Well, you know, bros. Bros are always asking their bros if they think they're attractive.
I love how explicitly he refuses to hear from the actual woman. Yes. It's like, I don't want to know. I want
to know this guy, quote unquote, as a woman, thinks I'm attractive.
Exactly. That's the most important thing. And so Ray's going through a lot in this episode. We're learning all about the things going on with him. And by the end, Fraser needs to give him a speech in reassurance because he's like going through a career crisis too about why did I become a cop and is it worthwhile and should I even have done this in the first place? And Fraser gives him a speech about the various great things he's done, people he's saved as a police officer. And he tells him, I would be proud to call you my partner and my friend. And you're like, that's sweet for people who have just met each other.
Yeah. Okay. Next episode.
Uh-huh.
As part of a case, they're more or less camping out, right? And Fraser's always telling stories.
It's the main part of his personality.
So many stories. And he starts telling, Ray and the guy that they're with a story about how when he was young, he had a Boy Scout troop. And there were only like 3 people in the Boy Scout troop, so they had to let a girl into the Boy Scout troop. So he says to the guy who's telling the story to you, well, you can't have a troop with only 2 boys. And she had very short hair.
And Ray excitedly is like, I got short hair.
And you're like, okay.
And Fraser says,
you are a boy, though.
Yeah,
you could have been in the...
You could have joined. But Fraser's like, well, we're lucky. We have a troop.
And then in the next episode, we've got these 2 moments. Now we're in episode 4, rather. Mm-hmm. And at the beginning of the episode, they're on a stakeout. And they see a man and a woman kissing in public. And Ray is complaining about their PDA.
And Fraser says, I didn't realize you were so prudish.
And Ray says, hey, I'll try anything. And you're like, okay.
Me? Prudish? No, that's not it. I'll try anything. And it turns out he's being like this because it's his ex-wife on a date with a guy. But yeah, he'll try anything. Just ask him. And in this episode, for some reason, Fraser's being like psychologically evaluated by the Canadian government. And part of that involves word association. So he's trying to introduce Ray to the concept of the word association games. And one of the words that he gives to Ray is closet. And Ray's like, what kind of question is that?
Good times.
Okay, and then this is much later, but just another sort of suggestive moment for the 2 of them from season 4. They're talking about women generally and how neither of them are doing much with women. And Ray says, I don't know who has less sex, me or you, but at least I still think about women. Is that better or worse?
It's an interesting question. That's what Fraser says. That's not me.
No, it is an interesting question.
So that's, just interesting stuff going on with Ray K.
Mm-hmm. I think in that episode, they also hold hands when one of them, I think Ray helps Fraser up off the ground. And they just keep holding hands, like until the end of the shot. They never let go of each other's hands. You're like, that's
always
nice.
Cute.
Cuties.
It's always cute to hold your buddy's hand.
Yeah.
So also in these seasons, we do have some romantic interest for our boys. It seems like, I guess Fraser's gotten over Victoria a little bit because he does have a couple of dalliances. The first is in an episode where a bounty hunter comes by and she's got a couple of kids and Fraser really bonds with her. Ray can't be that involved because the police station is on strike right now. Mm-hmm. And so, yes, they have a bit of a romance.
His father likes her for Fraser because she seems sturdy, which I fully agree with. She does seem sturdy. But yeah, she seems cool. She's like a ladies doing it for themselves kind of gal, but it doesn't work out because, first of all, she doesn't live in Chicago. And second of all, she has a guy she's still married to who's in her life, and things are like pretty complicated on her end.
Yeah.
But it was a nice little emotional moment for Fraser. Mm-hmm. And then later on, we have an episode where this Canadian country singer, which is interesting, sort of like a Shania Twain moment, comes to town and they're providing security for her because she's been getting death threats. And Fraser ends up really bonding with her. And also, she figures out he can sing and he sings backup on one of her songs. And she invites him to come on tour with her at the end, but Fraser can't leave. And she also is still married to a guy that she has a complicated relationship with.
That's true, too. And then last but not least, we have a Mountie who comes down from Canada on her own, and she's also on the trail of the killers of someone, as that's how Mounties make their way to Chicago. And it seems like there's a little bit of tension between her and Fraser. I think Ray Kay is also interested in her as well, but she seems to, like Fraser more, which makes sense. They have more in common.
Yeah, they have a bond.
Yes. But then it's revealed it's his sister, his half-sister.
That's why the bond. He's like, I really feel like we have a lot in common. And it is DNA.
It's not going to go anywhere.
She does also like Ray because at the end, she gives him a little smooch. She gives Ray a little smooch, which is nice. But yeah, nothing's going to come of that because she also has to go back to Canada. But it is sort of interesting that Ray has this, he really likes this female version of Fraser, because of course he does.
He wants someone who's kind and honest and, you know.
And there is a funny moment when they're debating about it, and he's asking Fraser if he has feelings for her well before they know she's his sister, of course. And so they have this conversation about how they have a lot in common, and Ray is like, yeah, you're both Canadian and you're both kind of odd. And Fraser says, I do feel oddly comfortable with her. And it gets to a point where he's like, Fraser says, you know, she might prefer you. And Ray says, oh, yeah, she's not going to go for the good-looking freak who speaks the same language. She's going to go for the Chicago flatfoot with the experimental hair.
Do you like that he refers to his hair as experimental?
Classic. So that's kind of also a Ray K love interest then, but we can talk about his love interests. Obviously, Stella. The Stella.
Yes.
His ex-wife is his
ex-wife
person. She's, you know, the only woman he's ever loved, really. They've been together since they were children. And so it's really messed him up that they've gotten divorced. It seems to be kind of a reason that he came and took this undercover assignment, was to escape his life for a little bit.
Yes, but she's a state's attorney, so she's around for crime reasons.
Yeah. And they do sort of still definitely have a pull to each other. They both know it's not a good idea and it's not going to work out, but there are times when they're tempted to hook up again. And they dance. They love to dance. And then we also have a moment in season 4 when there's this woman on a case, like an old man who Fraser is friends with has died. And the woman who is the nurse to this old man's wife is this beautiful young woman who Ray immediately is obsessed with while they're working the case. But then the question throughout the episode is, she seems a little suspicious. Like, could she have been involved in this crime? And so you're wavering back and forth about the evidence of whether or not she's guilty. And Ray feels like, first he feels like Fraser is trying to butt in and get the woman away from him. But then he feels like Fraser is judging him for being interested in her. And it becomes a whole thing. And he's like, what, just because she's attractive and interested in me, she must be a criminal? And Fraser's sort of like, I think this is what's going on in your mind, not in my mind. But that's another love interest for him that Ray ends up messing up. It turns out that she's not guilty, but he's accused her of murder at this point, so it's not really gonna...
Yeah, and she doesn't really forgive him for that, which, fair enough.
I guess, fair enough, yeah. So, various partner stuff to be discussed. Mm-hmm. Partnership is a very important thing to the two of them. They talk about it a lot. When they first meet, Ray's talking to Fraser about how if you look through history, you'll see various duets. It's all about pairs of people. And so they have a lot of discussion throughout about their partnership and what it means to each other. And there's an episode when Ray ends up seeking asylum at the Canadian consulate because someone has been killed. He has no memory of it. He's being accused of the crime, and he comes here so they can work it out together. And when he comes, he has head wounds, and we see Fraser tending to Ray's head wounds in a way that, you know, the reversal of Fraser having his wounds tended to by a lady. And then the episode becomes about needing to trust each other. Fraser doesn't believe that Ray did it, even though Ray doesn't really know himself. And so they have this conversation when Ray's trying to leave the consulate, and Fraser's like, you have to stay here. We're going to figure it out. Ray says, because to explain why he's trying to leave, I got to do something.
Yes, you do. You have to trust me.
Trust you, Fraser? I don't even know if I trust me. I don't think I wiped Wolpe, but I can't remember details. That might have been my finger on the trigger.
You didn't shoot that man.
How do you know? How can you be so sure?
Because I know you. You're my partner, and you're my friend.
Was that hard to say?
Not in the least.
Oh, it's not hard to share your feelings.
Boys.
They're sweet boys.
The next thing we want to talk about is the season 3 finale. It's a 2-parter, and it opens with a reference to something else we've talked about on this
Something
podcast,
else queer-coded?
Which is Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid.
Hell yes.
So it starts with them being pinned by gunfire on the roof of a building, you know, like a wharf or something. Mm-hmm. And Fraser says to Ray, we've got to jump. We've got to get into the water to get out of here. And Ray says, I can't swim.
Yeah.
Classic
And then they have a
question.
moment of him being like, what? The quality of the water will kill us, which is like from that conversation. But they do jump. And then we find out they're in a fight. They've been in a fight for some reason. Why aren't they getting along? It sort of comes out of nowhere like a season 4 Starsky and Hutch fight. But they're in a fight and it must be resolved. So after they get out of the water, they're having a typical argument, but Ray is sort of like, you have to stop talking to me. Stop talking to me or I'm going to hit you. And he doesn't stop talking to him. So he does hit him. He punches him straight in the face. And you're like, damn, what is going on with the two of them? It's not good.
Too much.
Then they get presented by each of their bosses with an opportunity for transfer. Fraser could go back to Canada and Ray could leave this undercover assignment and go back to being himself. And so they're presented with a choice. What will we do? Our partnership is in trouble. We could just abandon it and walk away. And they go to meet and talk about things. And Ray doesn't like them being on uneven footing. So he makes Fraser punch him back. Fair enough. Seems like he punches him harder than Ray punched him, but that's okay. And then as they're going to go their separate ways, a body shows up. And they're like, okay, I guess one last case.
Quite an elaborate case. Involves like ghosts.
A ghost
sailors.
ship. The Robert Mackenzie. Criminal pirate sailors. A map to treasure. There's all sorts of stuff going on. Gold.
Toxic waste.
It's got it all. Truly. So they have to head up to Sault Ste. Marie immediately, drive through the night and get onto the ship. And they're off. So they get some advice. Fraser's dad is coming in again with the partnership advice, which he loves to give. He tells him, a partnership is like a marriage, son. Give and take, up and down. Who left the empty butter dish in the fridge? It isn't easy.
No, it isn't.
Buck Frobisher and I were a team. Maybe the best team the North has ever known. One day, we fell out, and it all got destroyed.
What did you do?
We swallowed our pride for the greater good. Someone is using a brave ship's name for an evil purpose, and you've got to stop it. You need the yank. Swallow your pride, son. This is how he encourages him to go on the case. And they do go on the case, and all the things happen.
Right. They go undercover on the ship to try to figure out what's going on. Benny does a distraction. Ray goes off. But then, oh no, pirates.
Pirates!
And the ship starts to sink. Oh no, where's Ray? Turns out when he went off, the bad guys found him in a very Titanic moment. They handcuffed him to like a pipe or something.
Yep.
And the ship
is sinking.
Hey, is this before Titanic?
No, it wouldn't have been, right? It would have been right around Titanic, like 98.
Whoa. Season 3 starts in 1997, September 97.
Oh, it's like right at the same time. They would have shot it presumably before Titanic came out, right?
Because Titanic came out in the winter, right?
Oh, I don't know that. November 1st, 97. That's Titanic
wild.
is referencing them.
Well, no, this aired January 5th, 98, but they would have shot it before.
Yeah, right around the same time. That's fascinating.
That's wild.
So, okay, it's not a reference to Titanic. It just is the exact same thing in an unrelated incident.
Yes, although unlike Titanic, Benny does not free Ray by getting an axe and chopping the chain. He frees him by grabbing his boot gun.
Gotta have a boot
shooting
gun.
the chain.
Yes.
Yeah.
So they do. They get out of this, even though Ray is still like, we need to communicate better because it takes them forever to figure out how to do it. He wants their communication to be like breathing, automatic, you know? So they're trying to escape this sinking boat. And as you'll recall, Ray can't swim.
Nope. Which is interesting because I think it sounds like Ray grew up in the Chicago area. And we weren't allowed to graduate high school without being able to swim, at least in Michigan.
Yeah. Well, it's the Great Lakes state.
Yeah, I'm surprised Ray was able to graduate from high school is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I agree with you. I don't know. Not everywhere has that, though.
Well, certainly not in the South.
Yeah.
But I think up north, most places, you got to be able to swim.
Well, I don't know. Maybe they didn't have
From
that
Chicago,
yet.
write in and let us know. Did your high school have a swim requirement to graduate?
But also you need to have gone to high school in Chicago when would this have been for him? He's got to be like in his 30s in the 90s.
Yeah.
So sometime in the early 80s. If you graduated from high school in Chicago in the early 80s, tell us.
Someone who did, thereabouts.
Yeah.
I imagine it would be the same backwards because my mom had to take a swim test to graduate from high school.
All right, anyway. Somehow Ray has
School seems
graduated
to want you to not
from
die.
high school and can't swim. You know, he's not a comfortable swimmer, but he does have to swim later, and he survives with some coaching from Fraser. So anyway, he can't swim. They're having to go through parts of the ship that are fully underwater now. Fraser finds a way out, but it's going to involve some swimming. And so he convinces Ray to go through this trap because otherwise, you know, he's just going to die. And so at one point, Ray is lagging behind and Fraser gets concerned that he's running out of air. So he goes back and gives him a little bit of buddy breathing.
But when they surface, Ray says, "What was that, Fraser?"
What was what?
"That thing you were doing with your mouth."
Oh, that was buddy breathing. You seem to be having a problem and I have excess lung capacity, so...
Buddy breathing?
Standard procedure.
Good. Okay. All right. Nothing's like changed or anything, right?
No.
Okay, thanks.
You're thanking me?
Look, don't get too excited, Fraser. The jury's still out on this partnership thing.
Well, don't worry, Mr. Instinct. I'm not excited. They're still fighting, even though they're sharing air underwater. This is obviously a big moment for the fandom. People will understand. When mouths touch mouths in the ship, it's a big moment.
So their partnership is improving.
Yes.
They are starting to communicate with each other.
There are various gun battles where they have to silently communicate with each other throughout the course of the episode. At one point, they end up in a submersible in the lake, and they're trying to find the ship that they're going after, and something has gone wrong with Fraser's, I don't know if it's his equipment or whatever he's using to get where he needs to go, and they're sort of lost. And Ray is like, I feel like we should go this way. Just trust me, I have an instinct that we should go this way. And Fraser's not one to just go with instinct.
Right. But his dad is like, trust your partner.
Yep. If you don't trust your partner, everything will go wrong. And he does. And they get where they need to go. They find the ship of Mounties that are all on
an old-timey sailing vessel.
It's like a boat made to look like the HMS Bounty, I believe. So, they find the Mounties. They go on the mission. They defeat the bad guys.
Save the day.
And at the end, they have a conversation about whether or not they're going to take their transfers. And both of them are sort of like, well, I know that you can't always trust your instinct. Yeah, I know you can't always trust logic. Well, okay. Are you going to take your transfer? No, I don't think so. Are you going to take yours? No. And then they just smile at each other and they're real happy. Aww. Then, you know, various partnery things continue throughout.
So the only other thing we want to mention with the Ray K Fraser dynamic is there seems to be a lot of, well, in one case, a very clear Starsky and Hutch reference, but more subtle Starsky and Hutch references throughout their time together.
Creators, and I don't know if it's because Paul Gross took over and he's a fan or what, but Starsky and Hutch references galore. People are fans of Starsky and Hutch making this show.
So the most overt example, there's an episode where Ray is training a young boxer and Fraser's coming along and they're trying to get into a place and the folks won't believe they're cops, I think is what's happening, right?
Or, well, they know they're cops because they presented themselves as cops, but they don't want to. It's like members of a gang who run a club and they're like, why would we let you in? We don't want to be hassled by you. And Ray's trying to say, like, we're not here to hassle you. We just want to ask questions about this other thing. And so he says to them, don't worry, I'm Starsky. He's Hutch. Like, basically as a, we're cool, man.
And I think that is the right assignment of characters.
Yeah, Ray is Starsky and Fraser is Hutch. That's true. But throughout, there's little tiny moments that, if you're looking for them, just made me think of Starsky and Hutch. So the word association game with closet is something that literally happens on Starsky and Hutch. Him saying closet. Again, in the boxing episode, at the end, Ray is having a fight with a guy and Fraser won't help him because throughout he's decided that, like, this is something Ray needs to do for himself. And so he doesn't help, and afterwards he's like, next time I'm in a fight with a guy, help. And this is another thing that on Starsky and Hutch, at one point Hutch has been talking about some technique for fighting that he knows is better than Starsky's technique, and so he's having a fight with a guy and Starsky's just watching, and afterwards Hutch is like, why didn't you help me? And he's like, I thought you had it. Another Starsky and Hutch reference, season 4, episode 6, the poker one, feels to me like a reference to the Starsky and Hutch episode Foxy Lady, where there's this criminal lady that they both kind of get bamboozled by. which they set up as kind of what's happening in this one, but luckily Fraser's not actually getting bamboozled. And there's a scene in it where she escapes the police station by going into a bathroom, taking the clothes from a cleaning lady and walking out, and that is a thing.
I think it's a cleaning lady in this episode. She's like a traffic cop.
Oh yeah, you're right. Okay, in Starsky and Hutch, she's a cleaning lady. In this one, yeah, she's a traffic cop. But she takes the clothes of a woman in the bathroom and she leaves, and no one notices her leaving, which is a thing that happens. And there's like a shot of her shoes, which I think happens in the Starsky and Hutch episode too. It's pretty on the nose reference.
Yes. Someone could probably do a more in-depth study than we did as we just, were flipping through the episodes. Okay, so that brings us to the series finale. Season 4, episodes 12 and 13.
Another two-parter.
And we get both Rays.
Both Rays?
That's right.
Vecchio's back.
Real Ray V is back. We got Ray V, Ray K coming face to face. What's that like?
Pretty wild. They don't like each other. Unsurprisingly, because they are rivals. So, Vecchio doesn't like Ray K because he's living his life and like he's an imposter. Yeah. And Ray K doesn't like Vecchio's presence because he's been building a life here for himself and Vecchio's going to blow all of that up, right? And so they instantly are not fans of each other, even though Fraser is like, I knew you would like each other.
Two best friends.
Vecchio's presence here has set Ray K off on basically an existential crisis. All of a sudden he's like, wait, this is who I am now, me and my partnership with Fraser, and this is my life, and the whole thing is going to go who knows where now that Vecchio's back. And so this all comes to a head in a conversation that he has with Inspector Thatcher, who runs the Canadian consulate. He says to her, do you ever feel like you don't know who you are? Like if you weren't around somebody, or that somebody wasn't around you, that you wouldn't be you, or at least not the you that you think you are? You ever feel like that?
Never.
Me neither.
If you weren't around somebody.
Yeah, I think it's really...
somebody wasn't around you.
There's a way that they could have played this where it's like things are all about to change for him. And so that is a big deal. Like he's going to have to go back to his old life and be a new person and have a new job, maybe work somewhere else. But he phrases it specifically about what is making him feel like himself is being around this specific person, not in this life or this job. But he's like, I have to be around Fraser or I'm not me anymore. What am I going to do?
Interesting.
So,
plot. Yep. At the end of this episode, Ray V gets shot.
Uh-oh.
He's in the hospital.
They get some new evidence about the case that they need to go off and follow. And so Fraser's like, okay, well, let's go to the airfield or whatever. And Ray says, so does this mean we're still partners?
If you'll have me.
And he will have him. So they decide they're still going to be partners, at least for now. And they head off to Canada.
So yes, the finale episode is Ray V's gone. He's in the hospital. He's recovering. We're now with Ray K and Fraser. So they get to the airfield and they hop on a plane, the outside of a plane. And when they get into the plane, the bad guys are there and they're taken hostage. And they need to escape from the bad guys before they get killed and dropped. So they jump out of the plane when it's low over, a snowy area. And luckily they survive. They fall through like 10 feet of snow.
Yeah, Fraser says it's like 30 feet of snow. It'll be like landing on a duvet or something. Yeah. So he tosses Ray on the plane. And
they survive, but they are in the middle of nowhere. Although Fraser's very happy. He's been very homesick. Yeah. So he's like glad to be back on his turf.
He's happy to be home.
But they also still need to get to like civilization so they don't die of exposure.
Yep. So he's handling it pretty well. Ray's not handling it as well. There's some hypothermia issues at play. And Ray's sort of complaining. He's like, I'm fit, but I'm city fit. Like, I'm not cut out for this wandering around through the wilderness thing.
I mean, they're so lucky he's a Chicago cop and not like a Miami cop.
Oh, yeah, that'd be an issue.
If he was a Miami cop, he'd be dead in a heartbeat.
So it gets to a point where Fraser is having to literally carry Ray over a mountain. And he's getting pretty worried. Ray's, unintelligible with his hypothermia. Even Fraser's dad is there and he's worried about what's going to happen with Ray. And so his dad tells him a story to carry him through. And he says, your mother and I were once trapped in a terrible blizzard on our way to Resolute to pick up supplies. I thought I was done for. Your mother too. We still looked a lot better than the Yank does now.
So what did you do?
We pushed on through the cold and the pain, kept each other going because that's what partnership is all about. And Ray says, Fraser, you got this hypothermia thing because you seem to be talking to yourself.
Fraser says, possibly.
Ray says, well, Fraser, just listen to me. You gotta push through the cold and the pain and keep moving because that's what partnership's all about. There's red ships and green ships, but there's no ships like partnerships.
Ray, you're starting to blither.
But I like the implication there that in his hypothermic state, he could hear Fraser's dad. Like he repeats him. He was getting close to death and could hear the dead person talking.
He's piercing through the veil. Okay, so they get to the top of a mountain. Yay. But now, oh no, they got to go down the mountain.
Oh, man.
It's even more dangerous to go down the mountain because there are crevasses. And then they immediately fall into a crevasse.
Because he tells Ray that they need to walk through the ice field as if it is a minefield. And Ray freaks out and starts running. And of course, immediately falls into a crevasse. And they end up stuck together in this crevasse 200 feet down. And they maybe could die. So Ray starts sharing as he does. And he's like, if I only have one regret, and it's that I never went on a real adventure. And Fraser's like, this isn't enough of an adventure. And he's like, no, something more dramatic. And they bring up looking for the hand of Franklin, which is something Fraser had been talking about before. And he decides he wants to go on a real adventure if they ever get out of here. They sing a song together. And then luckily they're immediately rescued by one of Fraser's friends.
You think their ghost ship adventure would have been a real adventure?
No, nothing is a real enough adventure when the whole point of it is that you want to keep hanging out with Fraser. It's like, no, we really got to go. We got to do something else, something more adventurous. So they make it out. They make it to the Mounties. They're hanging out, regrouping before they go off to do their final big battle. And Ray is trying to sort of feel out Fraser about what's going to happen when all of this is over. And they're sitting around a campfire and he's like, so I guess when we go back to Chicago, you're probably going to team up with Vecchio again. That's okay. That's cool. He's like trying to make it as easy as possible. And Fraser tells him a story about how his father and Buck Frobisher were always partners. And even when they were hundreds of miles apart, they always knew they were partners. And you're sort of like, what are you trying to say? Ray's trying to understand
what does it mean?
What he's talking about. And they, of course, get interrupted. So he's still left in a place like, what's going to happen to us when all this is over?
Anyway, the plot of the episode resolves. They catch the guy they've been chasing. And we get a very quick epilogue wrap-up of what happened to all of these people. All of the characters. Turns out Ray V marries Ray K's ex-wife. And they move to Miami.
Unhinged storytelling. It's so wild. They meet and immediately are in love. And then the the epilogue is like, and then they got married and moved to Florida and opened a bowling alley. You're like, what?
Just like, cool.
So
what happens to our boys, Fraser and Ray K?
Well, their ending is a shared one. Fraser says, when it comes to, and as for Ray, or should I say Stanley Kowalski, Sergeant Frobisher geared us up with tack and tallow, and led by Diefenbaker, we set off, Ray and I. We set off on an adventure, and when we looked below, he saluted. Sergeant Frobisher saluted, and I saluted back. Then off we went to find the hand of Franklin, reaching for the Beaufort Sea. And if we do find his hand, the reaching out one, we'll let you know. And those are the last words of the show. They go off together on a dog sled and then like into the glinting sun.
Into the horizon.
Yeah. Into the horizon. They ride off into the horizon together.
You're like,
and it's quite sweet. What will happen to them? What will become of them post-show?
We should have made a movie about them finding the hand of Franklin.
But yeah, they get their happy ending, I guess.
Despite the fact that the ending was total insanity. Like, all of the wrap-up was like, what?
Yeah, Turnbull. We haven't talked about Turnbull, but the silly guy who works at the consulate runs for office and gets hit by his own campaign bus.
Inspector Thatcher overthrows Saddam Hussein.
Yeah.
Which is like so crazy. But the most confusing one is Franny's ending, Ray Vecchio's sister, who they say she had 6 children by immaculate conception and loved every one I them as if they were her own.
Whose were they?
And I don't understand that. Are they not her kids?
I don't know. I don't understand. How can immaculate
Just because you had a child by immaculate conception wouldn't mean they were your own. They are your own.
You had them, didn't you? I don't know. It's very confusing.
If anyone understands that, please explain it to us. I rewound it. I was like, what?
Yeah. I don't know. I don't really know what that means, but she's got all these babies, so I hope she
Good
enjoys
for her.
that. Good for her.
So that's the show. How'd you feel about it?
I love it. It's super silly. It's very fun. It's real 90s. The Mountie and Chicago detective thing is just a funny premise. I really like the characters, and the tone is fun, and it's a good little cop show. I like it, and I really like Fraser and Ray K. I guess we should say, are you pro Ray V? Having watched it from season 1.
It's interesting because I think, well, no, I get the Ray K love a bit more, but I think I like the show better in the first 2 seasons.
Interesting.
So even though I like Ray K maybe better, some of the things they changed I really missed in the first 2 seasons. I missed the sense of place that was present in Fraser living in that apartment in that neighborhood. And also, as much as I didn't think it always worked, the fact that Ray was from a specific neighborhood and had specific relationships, like I think it gave it the show like a very real sense of place, which I think we lose in the back half. I've already mentioned I like OG Deef better, but you know, that's kind of
But
whatever
new
it is.
Deef is so fun. He's a sweetie pie.
The tone gets lighter. I think the lighting gets lighter in the second half. It's like a sillier show once Paul Gross takes over, which is fine. I think I didn't necessarily love what they did with Thatcher in season 2, but her character becomes weird in the subsequent seasons too, and I'm not sure I love that.
Yeah.
I don't love Franny, so the fact that there's like
I
so
love
much
Franny.
Franny in the later 2 seasons wasn't for me. I think there's more of a grittiness to the first 2 seasons, which I think I got used to.
Sure.
And then when it was gone, I was like, I don't know if I love this. So it's a weird dichotomy where I'm like, I don't necessarily love Ray Vecchio, but I do think I like the show better in the first 2 seasons.
Interesting. I guess I should speak to my experience watching it backwards. So all of the things that were normal to me about season 3 and 4, then you find are different about seasons 1 and 2. So there were things that I liked about seasons 1 and 2. I agree with you. I really like the building that Fraser's living in, although I really like the Canadian consulate characters. Like I like Turnbull a lot, and so I missed him in seasons 1 and 2. If we could have had all of them together somehow, that would have been interesting.
He's in season 2.
He like
Not very
shows
much,
up,
but a little
but
bit.
they haven't figured out his character yet. But yeah, he's not really like a big part of the show the way that he is later on. You're right. I think the overall tone is probably grittier, but I do feel like the emotional stuff in the later seasons works really well. Like the Beth Bottrell episode and I think that stuff is good. Although the tone overall is lighter. I guess just having experienced that as the tone of the show, it feels like what the tone of the show is supposed to be, because that's what I watched first. And I like how Welsh is more in seasons 3 and 4. I like Franny, so she works for me. I like new Deef, but old Deef is good too. There's no problem with Deef. He's great. And by the end of season 2, Ray V was annoying me a fair bit, so I was happy to be rid of Ray V. But that's my main issue with the earlier seasons is Ray V more than anything else. All right. Well, we're not apparently going to have any real Ray wars between ourselves, but...
No, I think we would be more likely to have Deef wars.
Deef wars. Although I don't have a problem with season 1 and 2 Deef.
I mean, I don't hate new Deef. It's a sweet dog.
He's a sweet dog. I think he's gotten more Chicago instead of Canadian. He's a less serious dog the longer he spends in Chicago.
True. Although I didn't love that he was constantly running off with other people.
You didn't love that?
No.
He's making friends. He's a friendly boy.
I also just didn't love the voodoo episode overall.
Well, fair.
That was not...
Voodoo episodes are almost always ill-advised.
Oh, yeah, Voodoo Island.
That's another
No.
Starsky and Hutch reference. It's like a less racist voodoo episode.
Well, yeah, they're never in blackface, which helps. Anywho, those are our feelings for the show. I think we both liked it overall. We both recommend it.
Yep.
All of the episodes are on YouTube. It's extremely easy to watch.
Go watch it. Someone has used AI to do a HD remastering of it. It looks great, and it's all
Yes.
free on YouTube.
Oh, that's the other thing I have to say about the season 3 and 4. As you know, the theme song of this show it's one of my favorite things.
Yep.
I listen to it all the time. I'm singing it all the time. I love it. In season 3, for some reason, in the intro, they added a harmonica. to the theme song, and I do not care for it.
For me, that was what the theme song was. That's
So
the
we could also have
theme
theme song wars
Yeah.
if we wanted to, but also the theme song of the show slaps.
It's great.
Hard.
It's really good. Well, we should just say the music overall is good. They have a bunch of original music written for the show by Canadian artists. There are a couple that have Sarah McLachlan songs that were written for the show. It's like pretty cool.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess we should talk a little bit about how it almost went off the air and like why all of this happened, which we didn't talk about. So this is a show that it's a Canadian production, but it was on American TV at the same time. It was a co-pro. And it never had great ratings, so it was always in danger of cancellation. After the first season, it almost got canceled, but they saved it and got a shorter order. And then at the end of season 2, they were officially canceled on their American TV show, and the show almost died. But through a series of things, Paul Gross wanting to save it and fans being really into it and all of this, they managed to get a new deal to keep making the show, but various things changed, like Paul Gross becoming an executive producer and a major creative force in the show, and David Marciano, who played Vecchio, having gotten another job or wanting more money or something. It's unclear, but not coming back to do season 3. So that obviously had huge creative repercussions for the show. But this is why it becomes so drastically different throughout the course of it.
And the order gets smaller. So we should say, as much as it's split 2 seasons, there are way more Vecchio episodes, because I think the first season's 26 episodes, the second season
22 or 3. I don't think it's 26. But
and then
longer.
the back half is both 13.
And I'll say, you said you like seasons 1 and 2 more. I think the quality of seasons 3 and 4 is higher, but that's my own, personal.
I mean, I understand that. I found them all to be mixed seasons, and so you might be having a higher hit rate. I'd have to crunch the numbers to really tell.
We're gonna have to do some statistical analysis and get back to you.
Yeah, I didn't necessarily feel that it was like, oh, these are all bangers in 3 and 4.
I think they're mostly bangers, but we can disagree about that.
Okay, that's our feelings about the show.
All right, should we talk about what the creators say and do?
Yes, we don't have a lot of quotes about the actors and creators talking about the relationships per se, so we're going to kind of blend this into our discussion of fan-creator interaction. So we said, right, this is the 90s. The internet is ramping up. We've been in this time period before. We've got listservs, we've got
mailing lists, chat rooms, various things happening, but you also still have physical zines. So it's an interesting transitional period.
Yes. So most of our quotes are with Paul Gross, who, of course, as we said, became an EP, and really talking to him about how he feels about fanfic, how he feels about people shipping the characters. Mm-hmm. It seems like he's not shocked by the idea when it is brought to him.
No.
And so we have a quote from an interview he did with the Toronto Globe and Mail where he said, "I suppose the character, Fraser, is public ground. If you're willing to bring it into people's houses every week, the fans are entitled to certain liberties, wherever their imagination is carried by those characters."
True facts.
All right.
Once the character is public domain, we all own it. And then we have another interview with him in Elm Street for Canadian Women, my favorite magazine.
Weren't sure we were supposed to read this as non-Canadian women, but we did.
But there's this great moment. It's a whole wide-ranging interview with Paul Gross about his career and how he got here. Apparently he was an award-winning playwright before all of this happened, so he's had a whole life. But they get to a point at the end when she brings up slash fiction and the idea of fan fiction, and he doesn't know much about it. He hasn't heard of slash fiction. He's like, oh, it's a big deal. Women writing things for other women. There's awards. Some Due South fic has been winning awards at these various things, and she pulls out a Due South zine and hands it to him to read, and he is just loving it. He's reading passages aloud in this bar and then laughing, and she's like, you're gonna get kicked out of the bar. And so we get to, he's like, this is amazing. What is this? What's the whole deal? And he says, what do they do? Masturbate to this stuff? I tell you, slash fiction is gonna go crazy when they see the new guy. He's really good looking and sexy. The dangerous side of Fraser. It'll be totally homoerotic. How can I see this stuff? Where do I go on the internet?
Aw, that's nice.
He's like, I gotta get more of this. This is amazing.
But also very sweet to Callum Keith Rennie.
Oh, yeah.
He's very good looking.
He's like, why do you think I cast him? He's very good looking and sexy. Women are gonna love him. But yeah, he certainly seems on board with Slash fic.
Yes. And in another sort of Starsky and Hutch-esque thing that we should mention, there are blooper reels from the show where, you know, the actors, I think this is particularly Paul Gross and Callum Keith Rennie, are taking scenes to their natural conclusions. You know, we talked about Starsky and Hutch where they would cut the camera off right before the boys kissed.
Yeah, and there's some near kissing in it, and then in the scene when they're shooting the "Are we still partners? If you'll have me" bit, Callum Keith Rennie turns around and braces himself on the wall, and you know, they pretend to have some sex, as you do.
Yeah,
it's an intimate moment. So that's Paul Gross. He seems chill with the idea of them together. So that's all we can expect and hope for from a creator.
Not only does he seem chill about it, he's excited to deliver Ray K to the fandom.
I know. He's like, you guys are gonna love this guy. Get ready, Slash fickers, because he's coming. So then we have a funny moment, which is something that we've talked about a little bit before. I think particularly in early fandom, when creators or people that work on the show found out about these fandom spaces, they would kind of dip their toe in, hang out, see what was going on over there, maybe have some conversations. And this is what happened after season 1 with, I think it was a script supervisor, something like that. Scott Cooper, who worked on the show, was talking to fans on a mailing list about Due South post season 1, and it got into some pretty heated debates about what was going to happen with Fraser and Ray V. And he felt compelled to be like, maybe we should move this conversation on a little bit. I think tensions are high. And he says to them, to the best of my knowledge, there have never been any plans to introduce a romantic relationship between Fraser and Ray. They will both experience some type of romance with women during our 2nd season. Hilarious that he thought that would make people stop.
Yeah.
No one cares.
And I guess he was hinting at Juliet and his Ray V's ex-wife.
Exactly. I don't really... What was Fraser's romance with a woman in season 2?
Thatcher.
Oh, yeah. Oh, see, that's another thing that was so weird to go back and watch seasons 1 and 2 after season 3 and 4. Because the vibe of Thatcher in 3 and 4 feels like, yes, she's like attracted to Frasier and whatever, she's like kind of weird about it, but it doesn't really feel like anything has happened between them. And then you watch season 2 and like stuff happened between them. They had a romance.
Oh, yeah. They've had a whole journey together. That kind of gets backburnered or shunted away. Like they were like, we don't want to do this anymore. Yeah. And so that was interesting too. Yes, Thatcher is his romantic interest.
True.
In season 2.
True. Okay. Those are our quotes. Anything else to say about the creators?
No, we've got to get into this fan culture. There's a lot of interesting stuff, some of which I know you are like, oh, I wish we had time to explore this more than we got to before this episode. So big thing, right, is what we've talked about, the Ray Wars.
It's a big deal. This is one of those situations where there already was a pretty strong fandom around Fraser and Ray in the early seasons. And then huge shift, things changing, the guy that they love leaving, a new guy coming in. And so there was some, you know, fandom discontent. There were...
Right. And I think what we read too is it sounded like when season 3 started happening, there was also an influx of new fans.
Yes. So Callum Keith Rennie had another show that I think people were fans of him from. He brought in some existing fans. And then also just the fact that it was like a reboot of a show on maybe a new network. I don't even know. It got new fans, people who hadn't been watching before. And so then you get this influx of people who this is either the only Ray they've ever seen or they already are interested in Callum Keith Rennie. And so there's like all these new Ray K fans and all the original Ray V fans are left being like, hey, this is our show and this is our guy and he's who we ship together. And now there's this interloper. What are we going to do about it?
Right. And you guys aren't real Due South fans. Real Due South fans have been here since the beginning.
Exactly. So you had factions of people, and factions in fandom always leads to unhappy times. So you were left with fighting between the people, and in an interesting era where it started to be like, if you were a fan of Ray V, you could exist on this, listserv or website or whatever. And if you were a fan of Ray K, you could exist over here, but the two of them could not exist together.
No. And because of the timing of this, we also read that like the Ray V fans existed in more analog spaces and the Ray K fans were more in the digital spaces. Like the crossing of the early mid 90s to like late mid 90s is enough to really shift where people are getting their materials from. So that's just an interesting component.
Yeah.
To the Ray Wars, but it got nasty.
It got heated. And there was even a conversation about whether or not they would change the actor who played Diefenbaker, but then that was its own thing because people were mad about the dog, even though they didn't care about David Marciano leaving.
They were like, a person got replaced, and you're upset about a dog, and you're like, well, the person probably, decided to leave or was involved in that.
Yeah.
That dog just got fired.
That dog just lost its job. That dog is unemployed now. Oh, but fans fighting is always just fascinating stuff. We're all in these spaces to have a good time and enjoy a thing we like, and why are we wasting energy on fighting with each other?
But you guys know how much it can just spiral out of control.
Oh, yeah.
You guys know how nasty it can get.
Mm-hmm.
It was a war.
It was a war.
A Ray war.
A Ray war. And we didn't even talk about like the religious fervor that forced people off of one of the servers because the person who ran it wouldn't let. There was like all sorts of fascinating stuff going on.
Yeah. She wouldn't let fic of Ray V have Ray swear or take the Lord's name in vain because he was Catholic, despite the fact that he swears and takes the Lord's name in vain in the show.
Oh, man.
And so she like shut down.
It like ended whole servers because people were fighting about this. It's just amazing. Do some research into this, you guys, because there's so much to learn. It's fascinating times in the Due South fandom. This leads me to what is not specifically about this show, but a little detour I felt like taking because I'm fascinated in it specifically. So we're going to be talking about a fic from a writer named Speranza, who was originally in other fandoms as Francesca, but changed her name to be in the Due South fandom because there was a character named Francesca. And so, as always with fandom names, I apologize if I'm mispronouncing it, but I'm going to say Speranza and tell me if I'm wrong. She is a big name writer in the Due South fandom, maybe like one of the most or the most popular writer in this fandom, and she is involved in an important event in fandom history, the creation of Archive of Our Own. So I just want to take like a tiny bit and talk about this because I don't have another reason to talk about it, though I could talk about it forever. In 2007, there was a site called FanLib that was being created, which was a for-profit fanfic site that was run by a bunch of people from outside of fandom. I think it was like all men on the board, and none of them knew anything about the fandom spaces, but they were like, we could profit off of this because people are making free content. And so it led into a lot of debate about whether or not people should sign up. And there had been this ongoing conversation about whether or not writing fanfic and putting it online is illegal. There were a lot of fans that were concerned that it was against the rules for them to do this. In a lot of early fanfic that people have posted, you'll see them putting little bits at the top of their fic saying like, I don't own these characters, please don't sue me, all of this. And so Speranza wrote this blog post as all this was going on saying, Dear fandom, could you please stop saying that? That was about fans who put out there that the fic that they write is illegal, that they think what they're doing is illegal, when that's probably not the case. Like every court case about this has said stuff like, this is transformative, it's not against the law for you to do it, but if you think that it's illegal, people will definitely use that in future court cases. So it was just sort of like, let's stop saying it's illegal, let's
not put that in the universe.
Exactly, let's just not do that. And in response to this post, her friend and other fan creator, Astolat, again, I don't know how it's supposed to be pronounced, but that's what I'm going to say, wrote this post proposing an archive of one's own, which proposed the idea of the fandom creating their own place where all fan works could be archived together, that we would own and that wouldn't be for profit and that would have basically everything that it currently has. She proposed in it like the way the archiving system would work and how, like everything about it, and that it could have fic from everywhere and that you would tag your fics and that yada, yada, yada. So pretty much what it became. But just throwing this out into the universe, I don't have time to make it, but if people are interested, we could make this. And then it happened. I think in 2008, it launched. They formed something called the Organization for Transformative Works, which I would love to talk in depth about at some other time, which does lots of things. They run Archive of Our Own, but they also run fan lore, which we love, and they have a peer-reviewed academic journal about fandom research. They do all sorts of stuff. But they just sort of, people got together and created this thing, and now we have a fandom space that is not owned by anyone. It's entirely volunteer run and donation supported. And I think FanLib ended up getting bought by Disney a year after it started and shut down. So, but just the idea that FanWorks could have ended up on for-profit sites, and then who knows what would have happened to them. They could shut you down at any time. You could get terms of service and all of your work could just get deleted. So it's pretty cool and interesting that we've ended up in this entirely fan-run, but like very professional platform that they have. But it's cool to see Due South creators involved in the whole thing. Yay, yay, yay.
Due
South. I would love to talk to Speranza. If anybody knows Speranza, hook us up because I want to know about this whole era.
Mm-hmm.
Should we transition into FanWorks?
Well, we talked about AO3, the creation of AO3. Let's talk about what's happening with Due South on AO3. It's all coming together.
There are 13,500-ish Due South tagged works, and of those, about 5,800 are Benton Ray K, and 1,800 are Benton Ray V. Now, we should say this is not necessarily representative of Due South fandom over time. I think most Ray V fics have sort of been lost to the ether.
Well, like we said, they were mostly analog. So you're talking about physical zines. Yeah. And until someone gets all the permissions and uploads all those stories.
So there was a Due South archive that existed on its own pre-AO3 that I believe Speranza runs, and she has archived everything from that archive over into AO3. But again, that is still, though it accepted works about Ray V and Ray K, I think, and as late, like if you come later into this fandom, you're just going to end up with more Ray K stuff. So I think we're not trying to say that this is representative of the fandom overall. It is only representative of the more recent fandom.
Guys, we don't want to get pulled into the Ray Wars, okay? We know that fires are still burning.
Honestly, I wouldn't mind being pulled into the Ray Wars a little bit. If somebody is like a big Ray V fan, I do want to hear from you because I think it's very interesting. But anyway, this is where we are on AO3. So because both ships exist, one more popular than the other, but they're both around on AO3, we ended up reading the most popular, or the most kudos, as we always do, Fraser Ray K fic, which is written by Speranza. And then we wanted to read the most popular Fraser Ray V fic, but the top, 5 Fraser Ray V fics are all Fraser/Ray V/Ray K. So we didn't read those. We read the first one that was just tagged Fraser/Ray V. So we can talk about them a little bit. Locked Room Puzzle is the Speranza fic about Fraser and Ray K, and it's just a little case fic. It's like a tiny little post-show case. The two of them are living together in Canada, and they're clearly together. It's been years since the show ended, and in whatever town they live, there's a new Mountie taking over, and she gets told by her boss, if ever there's a confusing case, just so you know, these really good detectives live in your town, so you can go talk to them. And so she ends up getting this case with a guy who looks like he's committed suicide, but she has some questions about it. Maybe it was murder made to look like suicide. So she goes to talk to the two of them and, just sort of gets a read of their vibe. They're these two interesting guys who are together in this town and very plugged in to the local gossip. And they end up solving the case. The guy had actually committed suicide, but was trying to frame his girlfriend's husband.
It wasn't a murder made to look like suicide. It was a suicide made to look like murder.
And so they solve it. They figure out that the woman's not involved, and they give her some advice about how to leave her husband. And Fraser and Ray K seem like very happy and having a good time together in their post.
They kiss in the story?
Yeah.
It's nice.
It's lovely, but I will say I think it's really fascinating. I've read many Speranza things. I really like her writing, and she has lots of good Due South stuff. It's fascinating to me that this is the most kudosed one. It's like just it's a case fic, but it's really short, so it's not like an in-depth twisty case fic. It's not a them getting together thing. It's a they're already together thing, and it's mostly like an outsider perspective on their relationship. I just thought it was really interesting that you never know what's going to be the most kudosed.
Gonna take people by storm.
But yeah, I thought it was pretty fun.
I agree. So yes, the Fraser Ray V one is called All We Gotta Do Is Be Brave and Be Kind, and this is by Spuffy Duds. And this takes place also post-show.
Mhm.
So Ray V is recovering, and we learn that when he was undercover, he had some gay experiences,
Yep.
and he's realized, like, this is a thing I like, and I'm in love with Fraser. And as he's coming out, he tells this to Franny, who's by his bedside, and she's like, "That's great, Ray."
And if you're interested in Fraser, then I'm going to stop being interested in him because it's too
Yeah.
weird for us to both be interested in him.
And he's not sure if Fraser's going to come back.
He and Kowalski still go on their grand adventure, which I thought was an interesting choice for this, but
Yes.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Whatever.
And Ray's decided he needs to move out of his family home. He needs his own space. He needs some quiet. He's had a stressful year.
Yeah, it's been a lot.
And Fraser at first is like, "Oh, I'll help you look for a place." But then he's like, "Oh, I also still need a place to live." Like, he's back. He's coming back because he's still been living at the consulate. And so they end up looking for a place to live together. And then, they get together. They're like, "No, this is what we want." They kiss.
Yeah.
And they're like, yeah. And then they're having a painting party at their new apartment.
Mhm.
All their friends come. Lieutenant Walsh, Franny, and Kowalski. And Ravy notices how Fraser looks at Kowalski. Not like he wants to be with him, but maybe just some regret that he didn't get to be with him.
And Kowalski comes and tells Vecchio, like, "No, you guys are together. That's cool. I don't envy you. Haha," like trying a little too hard. And Vecchio's like, "I think you do envy me." So he's just observing both of them.
Yeah. And so the story ends with him basically like, "Hey, Fraser, if you also want to fuck Ray Kowalski, I just want you to be happy, man. Whatever we can do."
Yeah, he's like, "We should invite him over sometime."
Yeah.
And you're like, "What?"
You're like, okay.
Okay. So again,
Nice.
we thought it was a Fraser Ray V fic, but it was truly a Fraser Ray V Ray K fic after all. Interesting. I thought that was an interesting one. Where like
Yeah.
Ray K and I guess they're just keeping the canon exactly what it is, so they would go on their adventure, but I think it's so interesting for the two of them to have gone on this adventure and come back and then Ray V be like, "I'm in love with you," and Fraser like, "Yeah, totally." Even though he does have feelings for Kowalski, but he's like not gonna act on it. It's just an interesting set of events.
Sometimes life is complicated, man.
That's true. Okay, so it is kind of interesting to me. This becomes really reflective of the state of Due South on AO3. Like, it seems kind of difficult to find straight Vecchio Fraser stuff. I found it really interesting to set a Fraser Ray V thing post series. I would imagine most of those fics occur during seasons 1 and 2, because I think if I was shipping Ray V, I would just ignore the Ray K stuff.
Yeah, but if you're like really irritated by the Ray K stuff, you might want to fix it, right? By being like, even with this interloper, no, this is the one true pairing. It wouldn't surprise me if there's a strain that's post-show.
I could see writing a fic that's about like, yeah, Fraser's getting mistreated by Kowalski, and then Vecchio comes back and this is how it's supposed to be or whatever. But
Or it's just that like Fraser realizes that Vecchio is actually the one for him.
yeah, like this Kowalski guy isn't the same. But I just thought it was interesting because I think if I had tried to guess what the Ray V fic would be, it would have been earlier. You do get in this one that Vecchio has gone through all of this trauma of being undercover, so he gets to like have a panic attack when he sees the paint color of his new room and that sort of stuff.
We mentioned, right, you have all those interesting moments early on in meeting Ray Kowalski where you're like, that's an interesting thing to say. That's an interesting way to frame yourself. And we don't really have that with Vecchio, so maybe you're also trying to like connect the dots of how Vecchio went through this
Figures it out.
transformation.
Yeah.
And that's what they do in the story, right? It's his year away where he's like, I'm having a horrible time. If I enjoy gay experiences, then like, this is what I'm going to do for myself.
Yeah.
And so that's interesting too.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Anything else?
No, I think we should get to our questions.
Okay.
Is it queer baiting, queer coding, or queer canon?
Ray V?
I guess we could do an answer
Nothing.
for both. Ray V, none of the above.
Nothing. How early into the Ray K development process was Paul Gross presented with this fanfic? How early on was that seed planted
Well,
in
it
his
seems
brain?
early if in his quote he was like, oh, they're going to love the new guy. It's like, I don't think season 3 had even aired.
Interesting.
It's an idea. Because to me, like, lots of it is sort of queer coded, however intentional it is. But the ending is so queer coded. Like, to have the two of them ride off into the metaphorical sunset together is, like, very interesting.
I mean, even just like the Butch Cassidy stuff at the end of season 3. So my fantasy is this woman introduced Paul Gross to this idea, and he was like, I'm taking it on board.
It. in you know, as well as far as you could go in the 90s, but he was like, oh, it's happening.
I gotta give these ladies something.
They need more fodder for their fic. We have to help them out. I've given them a new sexy Ray. Now I'm going to have Fraser and Ray flirt with each other throughout the show. We've got to make it happen.
I owe my fans.
It is what he owed his fans, and he delivered.
So anyway, that's my fantasy, and I'm going to say Ray K queer coded.
Yeah. I think Ray K as a character is just more queer coded than Ray V, even if you're leaving aside the stuff
again,
that
all those beats in the first 3 episodes. Do you think I'm pretty?
Yep.
I can be the girl in the troupe, and I'll try anything.
Yep. And he's a dancer. He's romantic. He's emotional. He's got all kinds of, like, non-traditionally masculine character traits. So, yeah. I think you're right. I think we can thank the... What's the name of the magazine for ladies?
What is it? Elm Street?
We can thank Elm Street for Canadian women and their, wonderful journalist who interviewed him for the entirety of the Ray K relationship arc. Mm-hmm. Love it.
Good work. Good work, Elm Street for Canadian women.
Okay, so then we have to bring in, if we gender swap them, would they be a couple? Which we can do for V and K, I guess.
Are we gender swapping Fraser? Or are we gender swapping V and K?
That's a good question. I guess, what if Fraser is Maggie?
I think the answer is yes either way, if I'm honest.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
No matter how we swap them, like this era, particularly of TV, to have a male and female cop partner, they're gonna would they, won't they them?
Yeah. Sometimes even against their will. On X-Files, they weren't trying to will they, won't they, and the fans were like, I'm sorry, but they're supposed to be together. And the fans won the argument. So.
They did. I don't know if we could think of an example of male-female cop partners of this era where that doesn't happen. Mm-hmm. The only show I can honestly think of over the course of shows I'm aware of where that doesn't happen is Elementary.
Oh, yeah. And they still are, like, interestingly intimate, though they are not romantic together. So, yeah, probably. Mm-hmm. Male cop, female cop partner. They're gonna get together.
Sure.
So, why isn't it canon?
It's the 90s.
It's the 90s. I don't think Ray V and Fraser ever would have become canon, but why are Ray K and Fraser not together? It's the 90s.
All right. How do we feel about this on a queer baiting scale? It's too early. It's too early to be true queer baiting.
So, yeah, I don't think we have a queer baiting scale number.
Okay. Again, watch the show. It's on YouTube. It's good.
Yeah. Go to, I think the site is, or the page is Due South HD. Just search that on the old YouTube. It's all there for you. Mm-hmm. What in God's name are we talking about next time?
We're talking about, again, not confident about the pronunciations of this. We'll know more when we've watched it. Edgin Darvis and Zank Yendar from Dungeons and Dragons: Honor Among Thieves.
Those are some
recent film.
Fantasy names.
Indeed.
Can't wait to find out how they're pronounced. Have you seen this movie before?
I've not.
Me neither.
I didn't see it.
I can't wait.
I heard it's fun.
Yeah, it should be fun. I love the cast, so I'm excited. Looking forward to it. In the meantime, if you have comments, questions, and concerns, particularly if you're a Ray V fan and want to come talk to us about it, or if you know Speranza or someone from that era who you can introduce us to.
We want to correct any of our pronunciations.
Yeah, that could help too. Reach out to us at ltbkpod@gmail.com. We're on Twitter and Tumblr at ltbkpod. Reminder that we have a Discord. Go to our Tumblr to find it or email us. And if you're enjoying the podcast, tell a friend, leave us a review, and subscribe. Next episode will be out in May 2024.